Right, we're live. Thank you for joining today. We'll have Iuliia Artemenko from BCG joining us from Boston to talk about backlog prioritization, which judging by the size of the audience, is something a lot of people are interested to hear. Iuliia, thank you again for taking the time for this. Before BCG, Iuliia has also been with HubSpot. And at BCG right now, she is handling pricing topics and a few internal tooling, which she may mention in the talk. So I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, guys. Very excited. Sharing my screen. Is that working?
See it.
Awesome. Yeah, so as Mirela mentioned, I'll be talking about prioritization of the backlog. So feel free to jump in with questions. Let me know if there's any specific pain points that you want me to cover. So I'll be happy to share my experience. As well as Mirela mentioned as well. So I'm currently a product manager at Boston Consulting Group. So I know they're mostly famous for being consultants, but we also do have software that is complementary with a lot of consulting services. And I'm working with our B2B sector, so all the hard software, hard questions around pricing and how to do the pricing correctly. And before that, I was at HubSpot, Experian, Blacking, so a number of different companies here in Boston. And then mostly the products that I worked on are in software as a services, so software products, from launching new products to working on mature products, so different products life cycles. And then I worked on analytical tools, pricing tools, data quality, CRM, CPQ tools. So all these kind of different areas of what I had direct experience with. So examples that I'll be sharing kind of will be related to that. And then how I became a product manager, just a quick call out. So I transitioned into product management from data analytics background. I was an analyst crunching a lot of data and numbers. And essentially that's how I became a product manager. I owned an analytical tool development for a small company, Blacking. And that's where I transitioned to be a PM. So let's dive into the content. So first, make sure that everyone has the same leveling field. Let's, quick understanding what product backlog is. Usually product backlog is just a list of items that were not developed yet, is not picked up by development team. It generally includes things like different ideas, features, user stories, bugs, and some technical data. So it's a combination of a lot of different types of product work. And then it's generally owned by a product manager, and the information into backlog is sourced from a variety of different sources. It can be market information, it can be user feedback, it can be support tickets, various different sources that are generating the ideas and features that go into the backlog. What influence a product backlog? It's important to understand because that will help us actually understand when you're coming from the point of prioritization, account for all these factors in the decision that we make, what should be developed next. So from the influence pain point, what is going into backlog and what is affecting it is commercialization targets. So maybe there are specific goals that the company has and wants to achieve this year. So it could be to help with the customer retention or trying to break into a new market and acquire new customers. So generally, you want to understand what is the commercial goal the product has. Different risk mitigation, so understanding the market, understanding the state of the product. So are there any special features that maybe a legacy software that needs to be updated and there possess certain security risks? Or maybe it's a risk from the market. So there's new competitors coming on the market and we need to be aware how are we addressing and how are we making sure that we can retain the customer base that we have. Financial considerations, so if your product has a specific goals assigned or a specific growth rate that needs to be accomplished. Certain companies where I worked, we had very clearly laid out goals where we want to grow 20% this year. So everything in my backlog should be helping me accounting for that 20% growth. Or when I was at HubSpot, we wanted to grow our customer base into a specific segment. So the goals we had assigned to that were around how do we help our customers grow into that specific market. Resource considerations. So what type of team do you have? Do you have a standard development team, assigned resources so you can plan for a certain velocity from the team? Or is it something that is not defined yet? So you need to kind of be aware like who's going to be working on the product and what resources you'll have in the future. And then stakeholders, that's kind of a big group to combine, but that includes something from internal to external. So implementations teams, delivery teams, support teams. How are they feeding the feedback? How is the business reacting to the information and fueling the feedback into the backlog? And the users itself, are they providing you certain pain points, and how are they engaged with the product? So all of these factors influence backlog. So essentially in all of the methods I'll be talking through, you will see how you can address all these points in prioritization. So how to start prioritizing? So I think a lot of you probably, if you're a product manager or work with product managers, you do prioritization anyway, right? Either it's conscious decision and you say, okay, today I'm going to be prioritizing what I'm doing and what the development team is going to be working on, or you're not aware about the fact that you are doing prioritization, but you actually are telling them in which order they should be developing some features, what goes into a sprint, what goes into a release, or what is going to be done this quarter or this year, right? All of these decisions are based already on something. And those are daily decisions that we have to make. So I'll be talking a little bit about the specific frameworks you can use to kind of enhance this process of decision making or what should be developed next. But generally, I think it's always good to start with this kind of simple steps, right? So first, no matter if it's a new product to you or just, you decided tomorrow I'll be doing differently than what I did today, start by looking into your current backlog. So what are the things that you have in your backlog? How big is your backlog, right? Do you have a lot of functional stories, or do you have a lot of technical debt stories? What are the sources of the features that you have in the backlog? There were cases where I started on the product that was already existent, so I've kind of inherited a backlog of things, and then it would be helpful for me to kind of go through and understand, is this something that's still active? Is this an old information? It's been in there for 3 years. Who kind of originated that source? Is still valid, right? It helps you to understand what are you working with, how current that backlog, and what actually will be needed then for prioritizing. Also understand kind of the product maturity. So it is helpful. Is this a new product? If it's a new product, then you will have a significant amount of items in the backlog. It can be really overwhelming at first. I've worked on a lot of new products where I had to launch products, and believe me, when you started the process and you have like over 100 stories in the backlog and features that need to be defined, they need to have a very clear direction, they need to have wireframes and descriptions and technical implementation specs. It can be very overwhelming at first as a PM to, how do I make this happen for my clients? And then you will also have, on the other hand, stakeholders that will be telling you, like, when is this going to be available, right? Can I commit to certain dates to people? So understanding that helps. So if you're working with a new product, using some frameworks and methodologies will be really, really helpful. And if you're working with something that's already existing and has pretty well-established product in the market, there might be less of the items in the backlog that you need to address. So you can define which type of method you want to use for your prioritization. So connected to the previous one, understand the business goals, right? The backlog and prioritization, the end goal of that is always to accomplish business goals. The product does not exist just to be developed for nothing, right? The business goals are helping to target your prioritization. What are we trying to accomplish in the end of a certain time frame? Either it's a release or a quarter or yearly planning. We are either trying to accomplish a certain goals in terms of customer retention, satisfactions, where essentially connect to the business goals. Are we, how much are we growing our product? How much revenue are we bringing? And what is the goal of this product that exists on the market? What are we trying to accomplish? And then consolidate the backlog. So you probably might have different sources. It really depends on what are you kind of inheriting or what are you working with currently. It's generally super helpful to have everything in one place. So you might have something like, Trello and Jira and HANA and Excel, so various sources where somewhere you're tracking ideas, somewhere you're tracking things that were committed for development or will be committed in the development, somewhere you're tracking some feedback from customers. So make sure it's all in one place because it helps you to kind of see on one comprehensive picture as to what am I working with, how many items are there, and which items do I need to prioritize. and then choose the best method. And that method is what I'm going to speak to next. So these are 4 different methods that I've identified and I've used before, so I'll share my actual experience using them. There's a lot more definitely, but I think it will, get you guys started. You can start with these methods and then explore what other options are out there. So good so far. Any questions on before we jump into specific methods? Awesome. This is a 3-second rule. If there's no questions, we are moving on.
So wait a second. We have on chat.
Yep.
Which prioritization method do you suggest for a new and mature product? Could the product maturity be a criteria to select one or another?
Definitely. And I'll call that out in the methods here as well. But for example, for new products, I often use Kano model. And I recently actually used Moscow as well. So even though Moscow method is recommended to use for like releases or sprint planning, I actually used it in the new product launch and it worked really well for me. But then the next step, you often layer out some of these methods as well. Stack ranking is something that is very simple, so I'll start with this one. Stack ranking is something that you can easily use for a mature product, established product. It's a very simple method, and I'm pretty sure most of us use it on a daily basis, right? It's somewhat of a list of different backlog items sorted in the terms of from most important to least important. So it's great for the beginners. As I said, I'm pretty sure we all do this. An example of that would be I wanted to add a reporting section into my product. My product is an analytical product, and I want to have a reporting there. So an example of this backlog items could look something from, my first most important thing is that I want to have a data structure outlined and defined. My next epic will be around calculations logic. After that, I will add a visual UI layer, so all the visual graphs. And after that, I'll add some convenience features for users like filters and search. And then after that, maybe I'll add a social element to it, so they want to share PDF files with their coworkers. So it's my perception as to what the importance is. Maybe I've collaborated, it's a logical order or some technical order of how things should be executed. And then they're just in this pile to do, and one by one they get done. So, it's a straightforward method. So the benefits of this is it's definitely easy to understand. You understand why do you need to do the data first and then the UI, right? It makes logical connection and sequential steps. It helps you avoid this priority creep, so it's clear what is executed in which order, provides you that time frame understanding as well. But it is a very heavily biased method. So in some cases where you don't have that very clear logical step or sequential, it's really based on the opinion of a product manager, right? So I think this is important, but someone else might think or have a completely different opinion, right? This method doesn't account for that other feedback. And then it is sometimes difficult to analyze and reprioritize. So if something else comes in that conflicts with that specific sequential step, how do I prioritize? Should this be more important or not? Because it doesn't relate necessarily to a specific method that I'm using or specific logic that I use for one item. So it might be a little bit difficult to understand how these two features or epics would compare one to another. So this method, I would say, most of us are doing, understand what's been working for you, and then how can you enhance some additional frameworks into decision-making process. So the next method is Moscow, the must-have, should-have, could-have, kind of nice-to-have method. It's generally used for release planning because it's very clearly defined. These are the items that are essential to the minimum viable product or specific to the release. So these items are definitely going to go in and will be released or executed. Should have generally items that are not essential or not critical to the product, but we will need in the product. And then could have and nice to have, these are, or wouldn't have, these are not necessarily always included into the release. So you're basically categorizing your backlog into these 4 categories, and then based on that categorization, you know which should be developed in which order and priority. It's pretty straightforward. It's easy to break down this into categories. And as an example, I mentioned to you guys, so I'm working currently on building a completely new product. So I had a workshop where I had a lot of different users who are my target audience for that specific product join, and they have been sharing previously a lot of pain points and their specific journey in that product. So because there were so many different features we could develop and so many different use cases that were shared, it was very difficult for me to understand what really is the most important thing for them. So how can I build that minimum viable product? So I use it actually to define the minimum viable product. We did a workshop with the users, and we actually had them go through the pain points first, and then go through the feature generation brainstorming idea where they generated all the features, and then they voted on all of the features. So they actually highlighted this is a must-have, and this is a should-have, could-have, and this is non-essential. We shouldn't have in the product. And after we did that across multiple users, we've combined it into a one single view based on the priorities that's shared by others. So it's a bit more objective, right? There's a lot of different users that weighted in on that. And if 5 out of 10 people say this is really important for me and they fit into my persona, then it is important. And I should include that into my minimum viable product. So it kind of helped me to prioritize what is going to be my minimum viable product, what I'm going to develop first, and what is going to go into my future releases, and how these changes kind of going forward. So it can be still, pretty subjective if you're not doing that with the users or with the market. So if it's just my decision, I sit down this morning and I'm like, this is a must-have or this is a should-have, right? This can still be a subjective method. So this is a kind of a pitfall of it. Watch out for this to not just be your opinion, or make sure to use in this method other either user persona representatives or your team to help determine the factors. And sometimes it is better to kind of either define the scope or release, but not necessarily helpful in like day-to-day prioritization methods as well. Kano model. Kano model is also used in launching new product. It is also kind of a categorization, but it is a categorization that represented from the user perspective. So generally, you start by doing some research. So you don't just go and categorize these are basic needs, satisfiers, or delighters. So there's 3 categories here. You will start with some kind of either user survey where you would want to understand how users perceive certain features of the product, and it can be also used with an existing product. Or you do a market research. So when I was working on configure price quote tool, for example, because it's an existing tool in the market, right? And I was building a version of that for a slightly different market persona. It wasn't something that's completely new out there. It's already exists. So my research included not only survey to customers to understand what they perceive as the basic or satisfiers or delighters, but also going through G2 crowd reviews. I went through all the reviews, and then this is what people are complaining about. What are the things that they say, this is an absolute basic need. I need to have this in the product. If you don't have this, it just breaks the flow for me. It's not super important. Or which features they would say, this is a great idea. It would be awesome if you had something like this, which was an indicator that some of the products didn't have those, right? So it kind of helped me build that base knowledge where I was able to break down backlog of different items and features into these categories. What are the basic needs? So things that people kind of need to have in the product to be able to successfully execute some action. What are the satisfiers? So these are core features of the product that fulfill the use cases that they do. And what are the absolute delighters? So delighters are features that they haven't asked for, they haven't anticipated it's coming, but these features that will be essentially driving that customer value and high customer satisfaction. And some examples of that recently, if you guys can maybe give me an example, do you know what recently Instagram released? New feature? No social media people here. So recently, just a few days ago, they released Reels, right? Which is like the highly editing, funny videos, kind of lots of special effects. So if you think about that, right, from the feature perspective and their evolution, when they started, having a photo filter was such a delighter, because anywhere you use any social media before, you didn't have the photo filter. Like, you had to be your pretty self, the way you are, no filters, no editing available. And after Instagram had that filter, it was such a delighter, but essentially it migrated into a basic need, because now everywhere you upload your pictures, you have somewhat of a filter that you can instantly apply to that filter, right? So that's one thing you want to consider with this Kano method, is that essentially all of these perceptions of the customers and their value to specific features, they change over time. So like photo filter change, they have to innovate further and further and further to be able to bring all of these delighter features to customers, because things that essentially had as core of their product and core of their model migrated into something basic that we just expect to have anyways, and it doesn't drive the customer value or a perception of customer value that we would have. And another pitfall of this method is that one person might think something is a delighter, another person thinks it's not. So you also still have to go through a certain aspect of subjectivity here, where you are deciding which person's opinion is more important and how to combine them together. But a huge plus of it is definitely you are giving voice to your customers, and it helps you tie back to the business value, right? So if you are working and if you are only prioritizing items that are basic needs, they're unlikely to result into that revenue increase or business goal drive, right? But you probably will want to have a certain mix of things that you're working on. So if, I'm generally looking through backlog and I will prioritize a certain number of basic needs that customers should have, because those are kind of like paper cuts, right? If you don't have like an export functionality or download functionality and everyone has that in the product, it's just an annoying thing that people will complain about. Core features, so if you're building a new product, you will have a lot of core features that you need to build out because other customers don't have that, right? Or have that portion. So you need to make sure that your product is on par with the competition on the market. And if competition, the quotation tool has a product library, has ability to see product categories, has ability to price products, you should have those features as well as dividers. So even though maybe I don't have 100% of all of the core features that my competitors have, but I have that one feature that is super cool. In my case, it was integrating with a Stripe payment for a quotation in HubSpot, right? So customers were able to pay through a quote, which was an extreme delighter for them because it shortened their revenue cycle. They can gather money much quicker, and it provided a very convenient method for them to collect payments from their customers. So they were happy with having that versus not having some of the basic features or some of the satisfiers. So these are examples where you can kind of be creative and tweak a little bit around what can you give to customers to help you accomplish those goals, and how can you leverage this method really to achieve the goals that you have set for the product. And the last method that I will speak about is the weighted scoring. So weighted scoring is considered one of the most objective methods. It's basically where you're also kind of going through categorization of your backlog and you are assigning certain variables that you think will impact how the outcome of that feature, how it will impact the business, right? So it can be something, category around, will this increase my revenue? Is it going to drive a customer value? Does it have a strategic value? Maybe it's not going to increase revenue, yes, or impact my customer, but I think this is the direction where we want to go in the future with our product. So there's a strategic value assigned to it. How much are the implementation efforts or development efforts? What are some costs associated with it, and are there any risks? And you can decide these categories yourself based on what is relevant to your business and your product. And the key here is not to fill in those details yourself, but have something you can use as a framework, right? So you pick a score, you can have 1 from 10, the 10 were most important, and then you have a very clear definition on this category. So if you're saying it's going to have an increased revenue, you need to have a proof of that, right? So is there a number of tickets or cancellations that are citing that specific reason that they're canceling? Or there's a number of new customers that you lost due to that product feature not being available, so win-loss reports and things like that. Those are your objective scenarios where it's not my perception, it's actually documented and there's a proof in the data that can see that highlights to me that there is a potential for increase in revenue. Customer value, same, go through the reviews, see customer feedback, how much of the sentiment as well as how much of the value the customers are assigning to that specific feature. Strategic impact, as I mentioned, what's the direction you want to take the product, so that ties directly into your product strategy, so you can come up and highlight those areas. It fits into my product strategy. Product strategy is supporting your business goals, so that should have a higher score. Implementation effort, don't do it yourself. Bring in your tech leads or engineering directors, engineering managers to help you score the features, right? So they should have a general understanding how long it will take. It will be a high-level estimate, but it will provide you a good understanding as to what the implementation effort as well as cost based on that. In order to achieve this within the time frame, this is the amount of teams that we need to have or resources. So this is the cost associated with that as well as the infrastructure cost. And then what are the risks if we don't have it? So that's something that a product manager can work together with salespeople or with other teams to kind of help them understand. So I would say this weighted scoring method can be used along as in itself. So, starting tomorrow, you can go ahead and plan your next quarter or your next year with some of these metrics. It can be also used in combination with Kano. So you went through these kind of factors where So in my case, I used Kano when I needed to build a completely new product, right? So I went through these categories and I got a really general understanding which are the satisfiers, the lighters, basic needs. And then within those categories, I wanted to identify the ones that I really want to narrow down my focus on. So I went through a weighted scoring exercise where I assigned the scores based on the criteria that was relevant to the company where I was. I solicited feedback from different teams to help craft these scores into something that's tangible, that everyone agrees on and has kind of common foundation. And then I came up with, okay, now for satisfiers, I'm picking these 5 features because they are have the highest score. For the lighters, I'm picking these 2, and for the basic needs, I'm picking this 5. For the next quarter, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. These are my methods. So a lot of these methods are intertwined together and help you to really decide based on what is the goal that you're trying to accomplish. Is this a long-term planning, short-term planning? Is it a planning that's connected to a specific business goal or kind of day-to-day that helps you contribute to that? And then you can take these methods based on what works best, what resources that you have available to help you in assisting in this process. So I used weighted scoring, for example, as well in the situation where I worked with a global product. So I had a global product that was sold across different regions, but not all regions contributed evenly to the revenue, right? So some regions were my majority of my core market, over 60% of revenue, and then other regions were contributing a smaller percent. But if you work as a product manager, you know that pretty much everyone's sharing the same amount of complaints, right? So no matter if region is 90% of your revenue or 10% of your revenue, they all are sharing a significant amount of feedback. So you need to prioritize that feedback and you need to correctly identify. And also you need to provide them an input, right? So this was something that I used to manage stakeholders, actually sharing prioritization, giving them transparency into my methods, because I think that's where a lot of team trust comes in place, where you're actually sharing, this is the framework that I'm using. This is why we are working on this and not the other products. And this is how I think it will allow us and help us to achieve specific goals. So once you have the transparency and everyone's kind of clear about the method, it's a little bit easier to work with people and they have an understanding when certain features will be developed and why they will be developed. And actually, with the next iteration, it becomes easier and easier for you because now they will come in with and say, I think this is actually, I'm bringing you a 10 on increased revenue and this is the proof that I have. So you don't need to dig for that. They're already providing you that insight. So long term, it's actually good to have kind of a defined method, share that defined method with the stakeholders. So it kind of helps to create that team trust and clarity in the organization. And that's all I had around the different frameworks and the experience that I had using them. So you guys have any questions? This is your time now.
Cool. And also for people watching us on YouTube, I'm going to transfer your questions here. And we have a thank you from Slavomir for mentioning the sources. Yes, sources are always great. And let me check.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Yep, I was just wondering if you do this on a sprint level, or are you doing this on a quarterly planning or monthly planning? I'm just curious, when and how do you do it?
That's a very good question. So in my case specifically, I do first quarterly planning. So I know, Agile, you're not supposed to plan that far ahead, but for my own sanity and just to make sure that I am delivering towards the business goals, I always try to think quarterly first. So what am I trying to accomplish this quarter and how it fits into my yearly goal? So if I have a 20% growth rate goal, for example, right? If I do this 4 quarters worth of activities, is it going to get me there or not? From quarterly, I then go into the release planning. So this quarter, how many releases I'm going to have and what's going to go into each release. And, the level of details is, of course, varies, right? I cannot be as sure about something 4 months away that I am on something that is 1 month away. But it really helps me to determine. So I definitely use frameworks on a quarterly basis, yearly basis, and then the release basis. And then on sprint, I would say it's most likely going to be something around spec ranking, where I don't often overthink it unless it requires a certain amount of effort or there is a conflict, right? So if I develop something this sprint, that will delay a feature that is impacting another product or is impacting a significant number of revenue that will be coming from us acquiring a product then where I would need to rethink a specific sprint priorities. But generally, I try not to spend too much time on that. And I think realistically, that's something we need to think about as PMs. There's kind of always a lot of pressure on making this priorities. It's impossible to do all this well-defined, documented, and proven prioritization on a sprint basis. But at least if you're comfortable doing that on the release or like a quarterly planning level, I think that will give you kind of a good baseline and comfort around it, knowing that you are developing the right thing.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Cool. We have a question from
you.
YouTube asked by Stefania Calabresi. What is the best approach for you?
For me personally? So it really depends, right? I think when I would say for some reason in my experience, I had to develop a lot of new products. So when you're in that new product situation, as I said, it's often kind of like, a pure chaos. You have no idea where do you want to start and what you want to do. So I generally try to use some framework because it really helps to narrow down focus and have that clarity built so you and the team is comfortable. So I would say must-have, should-have, the Moscow method was really helpful recently for me. It really helped me to kind of get from this a very large scope situation where you have a significant number of things that you want to develop, and it really helped me to narrow down what MVP should look like and feel comfortable that my MVP is actually going to deliver a value to the users, and we are working on the right thing because there's proven research that backs up that understanding. So that was I would say most favorite recently that I used.
Thanks a lot, Iuliia.
Mirela is speaking on mute. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Thank you for that. From Mohamed Murad, how often do you say no to new feature requests? How do you make yourself more comfortable saying no?
That's a good one, actually. Yeah, so I would say, it's a joke really to my friends, but generally, product management is sometimes most hated profession within the organization, right? Because mostly people come to you and they say, oh, can we have this? And you're like, no. And you say no pretty much all the time, right? Because you have a really good understanding as to what's going to be developed, why it's going to be developed. And if you're doing your job, you generally anticipate this type of kind of questions and requests and have it somewhere already in the backlog and clear in your mind. So what really helped me is actually being transparent. So that's one of the methods that I showed you guys, the weighted scoring. I used that in one of the companies where I worked. And that was a company where I was actually sitting next to sales team. So they would still like constantly, and they would ask me for things, right? They would be like, oh, I just took the customer and they would buy this product. If you had this, can you develop this for us? And can we be faster? Can we be better? And like these type of things, right? So I generally empathetic person, so I understand where they're coming from, right? They are trying to sell the product. It generally helps us all bring the revenue up, accomplish our goals. But what, I had the understanding, but they didn't have the same understanding of my side because it wasn't very clear to them. How are we deciding what's going to be developed or not, right? So what we did on our side with the team, we provided those touch points to the sales team and regional teams, showing them, being transparent, right? Telling them, these are the things we're going to be developing. And I know you asked for these 5 other things at the time, but they don't fit into this priority list, right? They are not increasing their revenue except that one customer that you mentioned. They are not taking us into the strategic direction we want to take. It is require a significant effort for us to develop, so other things will be in jeopardy. And they get that understanding and they appreciate that you're showing them kind of the reason why, right? Creates that trust between the teams. And since using that, it really worked, and I try to use it at pretty much every company where I work, kind of showing the reasoning behind the different prioritization. And every time I say no, I explain, I only have a small team at this time, and these are the things that are working on, and this is how it contributes to the goals. So the request you're asking for is just not contributing to that specific goal, and is impossible with the resources that I have. So can we pick up at a different time? Give them the glance into the reason behind.
Thank you, Iuliia. Christoph, you posted a question. Would you rather unmute yourself and explain it a little bit better?
So the question is basically, what do you do any retrospective on the issues that you put into development or that had been even developed? So basically, say you have this weighting system, and whether you verify how did you weight the given tasks and then come back to the waiting system and improve it further? Or, yeah, basically, if you have any recommendations around that process.
Yeah, so two factors, right? So generally during the sprint, we have the retrospectives that we reflect on kind of what was developed in the sprint. And sometimes that does come in place in there as well. So like if we develop something, but let's say the order of things was wrong, right? We developed something with it. Actually, we should have done this first because that will allow us to do this in a more configurable way. But we've already developed something, and that was a missed opportunity kind of. So we will get those learnings fairly quickly. So especially like things were done in a wrong order or the priorities were a little bit switched. And then generally when I do the quarterly planning, that allows me as well. So I look back and I say, okay, so these are the things that we've developed in these few releases that we had in the past quarter. And what were the results of that, right? If I work with new product, very, very often we are tied to a specific goals, right? So we either have a customer count that we need to get each quarter. So we would actually look at that and say, okay, so we said these features will allow us to get 5 new customers. Did we get them? What prevented us from getting that? What is the feedback that we're getting from them? And it depends, which market you're in. I currently work in the enterprise level market. So we in a market where the customer count is smaller, but the revenues are higher. So you can be very targeted with the feedback and you can get a very detailed information. And where, at HubSpot, I worked with a market where there's like 30,000 customers with a very small revenue associated with them, right? So you have a huge source of feedback and you might not actually get the specific points in that case. So you sort through that and you evaluate before you commit to the next priority, what was the impact of the most recent prioritization and how you want to adjust, because it all has to kind of exist within the context of each other.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
All right, we have one more from Richard Illig. Do you use a method to get your input into the Kano model? Shouldn't they decide what is a delighter, satisfier, basic feature? Richard, who do you mean by they?
The user again. So what is really nice of the Moscow model is that you really ask the users to identify what is a must-have and what is a could-have feature. So how do you do this with the Kano model?
Yes, exactly. So Kano model actually does include 3 steps, right? So first step is research. So in order to actually bucket something into a specific category, you need to get the user perspective, because the whole goal of the method is give them the voice, right? How you give them the voice differs by the different research methods that you decided to take. So when I used Kano model, when I was building a quotation tool, I use it as a survey first. So I specifically selected my target audience, so people that I'm building this software for. And I deployed a survey to help me understand what are some of the kind of essential features in the quotation tool. So I've highlighted different features that I think my hypothesis, your hypothesis will have to kind of go in there, right? So I think having a payment method is important. So I will include different levels of features and allow them to score those features or rank those features for me. And then I overlay it with an additional method because, as I said, CPQ tools, configure quotation tools already exist. There's tools on the market, and there's already millions of users who are using this tool. So what I did as a second layer of research is I actually went through the reviews of the famous tools. So like, for example, Salesforce and other tools that are already out there that people are using that are great tools. What are they saying that works for them, doesn't work for them? And that is a great source of my potential delighters as well, right? So I would say definitely the goal of the method is not for you to score any of this, for users to provide you a good baseline understanding first, and then you use based on an understanding which categories to assign to different features. But in the process, you will have to do some interpretation. Of course, they won't be like, yeah, that's a delighter. You kind of will have to make your own judgment on certain things based on the user input.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Then what I would suggest is we move on to the networking part of the event, which won't be recorded at this point. It means if you have additional questions, you can place them from the people watching on YouTube. You have the link to join on Zoom for this part that won't be recorded. And for people who will tune in later for this recording, that is it. Thank you for watching, and I'm going to stop right now. Just give me a second.